Before we begin, drop your city and the time you're watching from in the comments. There's something different about hearing these stories late at night, especially when you're alone. Tonight, I've got 3 stories. Each one involves someone who thought they were by themselves. Each one learned the same thing. They weren't. Let's get into it. I want to start by telling you about my dog because she matters to this story in a way that took me a long time to understand. Her name was Rue. She was a 7-year-old shepherd mix, and she was not a nervous animal. I need you to understand that before anything else. She had slept through thunderstorms that knocked out the power. She had watched me drag a dead deer off the back of the property without so much as standing up. I had walked that land at 2 a.m. with nothing but a flashlight, and she would trot ahead of me like it was the middle of the afternoon. She was calm. She was steady. She was the kind of dog that makes you feel like whatever is out there, you would know about it before it got close, which is exactly why the first night she refused to come inside, I stopped and I paid attention. It was mid-October. I called her in around 9 o'clock, the way I did every night, and she didn't come. That alone was unusual. Rue always came when I called. I went to the back door and looked out into the yard, and I could see her standing about 20 feet out, in the dark, facing the house. Not sniffing around, not chasing something. Facing the house, completely still. And I followed the line of her gaze up the back of the house to the 2nd floor, to the window of the guest room on the south side, a room I hadn't been in weeks. There was nothing in that window, no light, no movement, nothing. But Rue was locked onto it like something was there that I couldn't see. I told myself she'd heard a squirrel in the attic. I called her name again. She didn't move. I had to walk out into the yard and bring her in by the collar, and she resisted the whole way, pulling back toward the yard, toward that window, the entire time I walked her inside. I went upstairs and checked the guest room. I checked the closet, under the bed, the window latch. Everything was exactly as it should be. Latch locked, glass clean, nothing there. I came back downstairs and I told myself it was nothing. Animals pick up on sounds and smells we can't register. She'd heard something in the walls, maybe. A pipe, a rodent, something. I let it go. But that night, instead of sleeping at the foot of my bed the way she always did, Rue slept pressed against the bedroom door, right up against it, like she was blocking something from coming in. I noticed it. I didn't say anything about it. I just noticed it. And I pulled the blanket up a little tighter, and I told myself it was nothing. 3 nights later, she did it again. I was ready this time. I stood at the back door, and I watched her before I went out to get her. Same position in the yard, same window, same flat ears. And I want to tell you about those 5 minutes I stood there watching her, because this is the detail that changed everything for me. She didn't move, not a single shift of weight, not one ear flick toward me when I said her name. In 7 years, I had never once called that dog's name and had her not look at me. Not once. It was like a reflex she'd had her whole life. You say Rue, she looks. Every time, without fail. But she didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on that window for the entire 5 minutes I stood there, like whatever was up there was more important than anything I could say to her, like she already knew what I didn't. I went back upstairs. I looked more carefully this time, and what I found on the outside of that window is the part I still don't have an explanation for. The window latch was still locked. The glass was clean on the inside, no smudges, nothing. But I pressed my face close to the glass and looked at the outside surface carefully, at an angle where the light would catch it. And there they were, 2 marks. Long, vertical, side by side, low on the pane, right about the height something would press against it if it was bracing from outside. The shape your palm makes when you lean against a surface. 2 of them, parallel, faint but unmistakable. I want you to understand the geography here. That window is on the 2nd floor. There is no ledge below it. No trellis, no drain pipe, nothing within reaching distance. Whatever pressed against that glass from outside had to have been there at height, with nothing supporting it from below. I stood at that window for a long time. Then I got a cloth and I wiped it clean, and I went back downstairs, and I did not look at the window again for 2 weeks. For those 2 weeks, Rue came inside normally every night, slept at the foot of the bed, I started to believe the whole thing had an explanation I just hadn't landed on yet. A bird strike, maybe. Some kind of condensation pattern I didn't understand. I almost convinced myself. Then the week before the first hard frost, I went back to that guest room to close the storm window for winter. I looked at the glass the way I had before, at that angle where the light catches the surface. And I want to tell you what I saw. The marks were back. Same shape, same height, same 2 long vertical impressions on the outside of the second floor glass. Fresh. Whatever had been there before had come back and pressed against that window again while I was sleeping 2 rooms away, and Rue was pressed against my door, and I had told myself it was nothing. What bothers me most about that story isn't the marks. It's Rue, because dogs don't perform. They don't stand in the cold for 5 minutes staring at a window because they're curious. She knew something had a position on that property, a specific window it came back to, a routine it kept. She'd been tracking it longer than I had. The next story has no animal, no warning system at all, just a man, a street, and a light that had been running on nothing for months before anyone thought to ask why. I moved into my house in March, and the place across the street was already empty when I got there. Gray 2-story, blue shutters, realtor lockbox on the front door. There was a utilities shutoff notice still taped to the mailbox from the month before, the kind of house that you register once and then stop seeing because there's nothing happening there. The first week I noticed the porch light was on, and I assumed the realtor had left it. Happens all the time with vacant properties. Then I noticed it was off during the day and on at night, which meant it was on a sensor or a timer, which is completely normal. So I stopped noticing it altogether, except that I kept waking up at night, the way bad sleepers do, and the light from that porch kept coming through my bedroom curtains. And at some point I started noticing that it was always the same moment. Not roughly the same time, the exact same moment. Every single night at 11:04, that porch light switched on. I want to be clear about what I mean by exactly. I started checking my phone when the light woke me up. For 11 nights in a row, I logged the time. 11:04, 11:04, 11:04, not 11:03, not 11:05. The same minute every single night, consistent enough that I started half expecting it before it happened, like waiting for an alarm you set yourself. I told myself there was a simple explanation, a smart timer, a motion-triggered app, something the previous owner had set up and forgotten about. Properties sit vacant for months sometimes, and automated systems keep running. I had a completely rational explanation, and I held on to it. Until June, when I met the property manager at a neighborhood block event, and I mentioned the house across the street, and she told me the utilities had been formally disconnected since February, a month before I even moved in. I asked her specifically about the porch light. She looked at me like I'd said something that didn't make sense. She said there was no power to that house, had been no power since February. I described the light to her. Warm bulb, comes on every night at 11:04, been doing it every night since I moved in. She shook her head, said it wasn't possible. I want you to sit with what that means. The power to that house was cut in February. I arrived in March. That light had been coming on every single night since I arrived, at the exact same minute, for 3 months, on a timer connected to nothing, running on no electricity, keeping a schedule no one had set, in a house where no one lived. I drove home from that block party, and I sat in my car in my driveway, and I looked at that porch for a long time before I went inside. I went over there the next night. I want to tell you I found a logical explanation, but what I actually found was that the light wasn't the only thing in that house that had been running. I crossed the street the following evening at 11 o'clock and stood on the sidewalk and waited. At 11:04, the light came on. Right on schedule, same as every other night, except now I was standing 4 feet from it. I walked up the porch steps and I pressed my hand flat against the glass cover of the light fixture. It was hot. Not warm, hot. The way a bulb gets when it's been running for hours. I stood there holding my hand against it, and I could feel the heat, and I could not explain what I was touching. I tried the front door. Locked. I walked around to the narrow sidelight window beside the entry, and I cupped my hands against the glass and looked inside. Bare floors, no furniture. Completely dark except for the porch light coming in through the transom. And then I saw the floor. The hardwood floor in the entry hallway had a thin layer of dust on it, the kind that settles over months in a closed, empty house. But right at the base of the front door, running along the floor in a narrow arc, the dust had been disturbed. A clean, swept line in the shape a door makes when it swings open. That pattern only happens one way. A door has to physically open and sweep the floor to leave that mark. And the mark was recent. The disturbed dust was still slightly raised at the edges, not settled back down. That door had been opened from the inside, in a house with no power, no residents, no key on record with the property manager. Someone or something had been opening that front door, and based on the pattern in the dust, it had been doing it more than once. I stood at that window for a long time. Then I walked back across the street and I went inside and I locked my own door and I sat at the kitchen table. I thought about the light running on no power. I thought about the door. I thought about the fact that whatever was in that house had been operating on a consistent schedule since at least February, maybe longer, and no one on the street had ever thought to ask why. The house sold 4 months later. New family. I never told them. I don't know if the light still comes on at 11:04. I don't look at that window anymore. I made a decision a long time ago that some things you're better off not tracking. Both of those stories have the same thing underneath them, a schedule. Something that had learned the hours, learned the routine, and was operating inside it with a precision that felt deliberate. The dog's window, the neighbor's 11:04. Neither one announced itself. Both had been happening for a long time before anyone noticed. The last story follows the same logic, except what was keeping the schedule this time looked like a child, and it stood at the end of a quiet suburban street in plain sight for 6 hours, and the camera that was pointed directly at it never recorded it once. My street is a dead end. 11 houses, a turnaround loop at the bottom, and a 6-foot wooden fence at the far end of the cul-de-sac that borders a drainage easement. It's the kind of street where kids ride bikes in the afternoon, and by 7 in the evening it's completely quiet. I'd lived there for 2 years. I knew my neighbors. I knew which kids belonged to which house. I had a doorbell camera that I checked the way most people do, casually, before bed, scrolling through the day's motion clips the way you'd scroll through your phone. On a Thursday evening in late September, I was doing exactly that, lying in bed, half paying attention, when I stopped on the 8:40 p.m. clip. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, just at the edge of the streetlight, there was a child standing on the road, small, maybe 8 or 9 years old from the size, standing completely still, facing up the street toward the houses, toward my house. My first thought was that it was one of the neighborhood kids, maybe the youngest from the corner house, or one of the Reyes kids from across the way, out a little past dark, probably about to get called in. I watched the clip twice, told myself it was nothing, put the phone down. But I kept thinking about the stillness, because kids fidget. Even when they're standing still, they shift their weight, they look around, they check their phone, they kick at something on the ground. This kid wasn't doing any of that, just standing there, facing the houses, completely motionless in the dark at 8:40 at night. So the next Thursday, when I opened the app before bed, I was already looking for it. And there it was, same spot, same posture, same stillness, 8:40 p.m., same as the week before, like it had a standing appointment. I showed my wife. She said it was probably a kid from the Hendersons or the place on the corner. I said maybe, but then I did something she didn't. I scrolled back through the full week of clips, not just the evening ones, all of them, and I found the first clip with the figure in it, not 8:40 p.m., 2:31 in the afternoon, same spot, same posture, standing at the far end of the cul-de-sac in the middle of a Thursday afternoon in broad daylight, facing the houses, perfectly still. I kept scrolling forward. 3:15 p.m., still there. 4:40 p.m., still there. 6:22 p.m., still there. 8:40 p.m., still there. That child had been standing at the end of my street for at least 6 hours on a Thursday afternoon and evening, and not one person on that street had mentioned it to anyone. Not one neighbor had knocked on a door, called anyone, said anything at all. Then I pulled up the motion log. The camera that had recorded 6 hours of footage of this child had not logged a single motion event. Not one. It had no record that anything was ever there. Let me be precise about what I mean. My doorbell camera logs a clip every time the motion sensor triggers. That evening it had logged a car pulling into the turnaround at 8:38 and leaving. It logged a raccoon crossing my driveway at 3:17 in the morning. It logged the mail truck the following day at 10:15. The sensor was working. It was catching everything that moved on that street. But there was no clip of the figure arriving. No clip of the figure leaving. 6 hours of footage of a child standing at the end of my cul-de-sac, and the motion system had registered none of it. Not the arrival, not the departure, nothing. Like whatever was standing at the end of my street existed in the space between the triggers, only visible in the clips it hadn't caused. I called the non-emergency line. An officer came out, walked the cul-de-sac, checked the drainage easement on the other side of the fence, found nothing. He was polite. He told me kids wander and the camera probably glitched on the arrival clip. I thanked him and closed the door, and that would have been the end of it. Except the following Thursday I didn't check the app before bed. I stood at my front window in the dark at 8:35, and I watched. My wife came and stood next to me. We didn't say anything. 8:38, a car pulled through the turnaround and left, just like the clip. 8:39, the street was empty. And then at 8:40, my wife put her hand on my arm because at the far end of the cul-de-sac, just at the edge of the streetlight, the figure was there. We had both been watching that spot. We had not looked away. It had not walked into frame. It was simply there, the way a thought arrives, with no point of origin you can name. We stood at that window for 4 minutes and neither of us moved, and then my wife said quietly, "It's not looking at the houses. It's looking at the window. It's looking at us." I looked down at my phone. No motion event. No clip. No record of anything standing in my street at all. That's all 3 for tonight. I don't have tidy explanations for any of them. The dog in the window, the light with no power, the child the camera couldn't see. What I do have is the thing all 3 have in common. In every one of these, whatever was out there had been present for a long time before anyone noticed. It knew the routine. It knew the schedule. It waited until the conditions were exactly right. So if you're watching this late at night, alone, and something about your own routine suddenly feels observed, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong to feel that way. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are, and I'll see you in the next one.